Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashrathi, and this is the EVE Universe Show's continued coverage of the CSM 17, this time with DutchGunner. How's it going, Dutch?
Howdy, howdy. Things are going good. I mean, had a bit of a late start because I was one of the unfortunates that caught COVID after FanFest, but I'm out, I'm running, and I'm feeling better every day.
I was extremely worried for you all, and I'm very glad to hear that you are recovering, and late or not, you got it all in on time, and here we are having our little chat. You weren't first this year, but that's fine. We get to now experiment whether or not that helps or not. No,
that's the late start, but then again, I'm here, and I'm ready to go.
Absolutely. And so, kind of as I just alluded to, you and I have obviously chatted before. This is not your first time running on the CSM, and also we run in similar circles. You're in Arataka Research Consortium, which is a pretty famous role-playing group, most famous for basically solving what the Triglavian wanted problem before CCP even, before CCP had even figured out or put out our clues, right? You guys really tracked all of the stars.
Yep, I really love that report because it's a perfect highlight to show that the breadcrumbs are out there.
Right.
You just need to look for them and pick up on it, because then all of a sudden you can get some really cool clues on what's going to happen in the future.
Exactly. And I think that that's one of the things that has always frustrated me about the way that we talk about the lore, right? There's a lot of people that are very dismissive about it. But the thing that bothers me the most is the idea that it's all just random, or they don't really think it through or whatever. Because, the more you look into it, the more you realize that there is this incredibly intricately woven and, thought through thing that is played out over the course of years. And there's so many interesting aspects to it that we just don't, we just missed. And CCP lets us. If we don't figure something out, it just kind of goes unsolved. So I've really appreciated the fact that Arataka Research Consortium, above everyone else, has really shown that not only is there something actually going on worth paying attention to, but it does have predictive power. That's the big key, right? Because you were able to predict which systems the Triglavians would want to progress versus not.
It started out with me wondering, there has to be some logic behind it. Maybe there's a reasoning behind it. So I started asking questions like, hey, can we start keeping track of what systems have been invaded? And then another person who started to compile the data went absolutely haywire on all the information, and all of a sudden he also started looking at the sun types, and that's why he came back with, hey, look, I think I might have found something, look at this data. I'm like, I think you're right. And it progressed from there, and that's how it ended up with the report, with a big list of systems that would be of potential threat, including Yarja. And as it turned out, a lot of those predictions turned out to be true.
Right. Well, at the very least, you guys identified that they were interested in blue stars.
Yes.
And specific kinds of blue stars over others. I don't think that you guys had really identified the gold star thing, but that's likely because nobody really thought about the fact that there are actually two different kinds of yellow stars. One's towards the lower band and one's towards the upper band. I didn't even realize this until halfway through Invasions. I watched a Kyrgyzstan video about it. But I digress. The whole point here is that you guys have put a tremendous amount of work towards this, and Arataka Research Consortium has a long history in that. So, okay, where do you fit in all this?
I started fitting in because at the start of the Triglavian invasions, I was wandering around looking for something else to do. I came into touch with ARC, the Arataka Research Consortium, and as it usually happens, I was the one who went, hey, look, there's something new. Never done this before, just like any of you, but if you're willing to trust me, I'm willing to FC and start interacting and see what this new stuff is. And that way I work my up to become pretty much the main FC for all public fleets, because all the ARC fleets were public. Everybody could join them. And then that turned out to, over time, get an invitation to become part of the ARC Alliance and community leadership. And that's where I still am today. Like, I'm not the leader, there are also others. And I'm very thankful for that. And I'm really happy to seeing what the community turned into, because you don't have to be part of the Alliance to participate with whatever we do. And we try to keep it as open as possible, because we all agree that Eve has a lot to offer. There's a lot of different playstyles, and it usually comes down to having someone show you the way. Like, hey, look, this is an option, or hey, that is an option, or have you thought about this? And if we inspire other people and people start taking what we found and take it even further, we're very happy to see that.
So, how do you feel about the ARC system as it was announced?
I'm very excited because it offers a lot of potentials for including a lot of different play styles, even with faction warfare. Like, if I give you an example, what I started thinking of was, even with the frontline system, like, it's not just the combatants. You'll also need logisticals, you need explorers, and you can tie it all together where people could still contribute without directly having to go for combat. For example, you could tie it in with the mining event sites, where you could put some in high sec where people could get involved and support. You could put some in low sec. You could have hacking sites where there's intelligence that both sides need, and all of a sudden you can get a lot of different playstyles be involved or support whatever they want.
Right. And that just got me thinking about, like, and also, once you get all that worked out, what happens when the pirates get involved, in their own ways? We've seen Garistus and Serpentis, as well as, this Deathless gang, interfere in the war zone already.
Yeah, but that's also one of the reasons why I'm particularly motivated to run this year, because they're working on basically the groundwork, and if pointed in the right way, all of a sudden it could be rolled out to a lot more different areas in the game. Like, it could include NPC pirate nullsec factions amongst each others against the empires. It opens up so many new options to offer more gameplay that attracts a lot of different sorts of players that each can find something they enjoy.
How do you feel about life since the formation of Pochven, given your expert, your focus?
I'm a bit on the fence about it, because there's a lot of positives. There's a lot of things that weren't fully penned out. Like, it wasn't fully expected that there would be a lot of people that would have sided with Edencom.
Right.
If I was on the CSM and they would bring something like this forward, like, hey, we've got this plan, I would have told them from the get-go, like, hey, there's going to be a lot of different people that will side with the empires, if not for roleplay reasons, then it's just because they like how it is right now, and they're willing to put in the effort to keep it that way.
I'm going to jump in on that right there. So, CCP did not anticipate that there'd be an organized Edencom. And one of the biggest problems that have come out of this is the fact that Edencom people felt very high and dry. And, it's been a big problem, and it continues to be a big problem, to the point where, from my understanding, CCP literally apologized about it at FanFest. What do we do now? How do we fix it?
Well, one thing is to learn from what has happened and take those lessons forward in what's going to be rolled out now, because at the same time, CCP made it very clear that the story of the Triglavians, and therefore Edencom, is not yet finished. We've just finished one chapter, the invasion chapter, and there's still a lot of options to offer something for everybody involved. And I genuinely believe that it was an oversight that had massive consequences, but I still believe that it was not ill intent or bad design. It was an oversight. Like, it was not expected. People went for it full force, and CCP tried to do their best. But instead of hammering like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, I think it's more important to look forward and say, hey, look, you're rolling out faction warfare. Let's use that as an improved template and roll that out for the next part of the story with the Triglavians, Edencom, and all other Empire and Pirate factions.
Do you PvP? Do you lead PvP fleets or only PvE fleets?
The main focus we have is on PvE. That doesn't mean that I refuse PvP, but there's a lot of organizations that offer PvP if that's what people are looking for, and we're, as ARC, we're like in a niche where people deliberately come to us because we're offering something different.
Yeah, well, and I'm talking about you specifically. Like, where do you have very much experience as a PvP pilot, FC, or would you consider yourself pretty much a PvE FC that is scrappy enough to fight when you need to? Right? You don't take fleets to go roam around in Pochven as combat pilots, or go ESS raid, do you?
That's correct. That's not what I do.
Yeah. But you focus predominantly on like structured fleet level PvE. Is that fair?
That's what I've done so far. At the same time, when there's an option, I also try to organize a player event.
Yes.
Like an evacuation for Fail, and at the time an evacuation attempt for Pochven after it was formed.
Oh man, I want to jump on that in a minute, but let's go back to where I was going with first, which is that so what have you been doing? What PvE content have you found in the last year, like since Totality? Like, what is your structured PvE content right now?
Right now, interest just waned away, so I don't have any structured PvE.
Right.
But for a really long time, I took fleets into Pochven to help people get standings, to explore Pochven, to show them the sites, like, hey, look, this is one of the monuments, like the shipyard, or this is the rogue drone thingamabob, or this is why the stargates were disabled for a little while. Just look at all that crystallized isogen plugging the gate. Like, you don't want that ending up on the other side. And for a long time, we deliberately worked with the expectation that we could be attacked and that we would be able to defend ourselves. Up until the point where, after I published the report on how to dodge the Drifter Doomsdays without having to spend very many billions of ISK, like you could do it much cheaper, and shortly after that, there was a very dedicated movement to block any and all ARC fleets in Pochven, like coming up with hard counters and somewhere between 2 or 3 times the numbers of the fleet.
Well, if you weren't
possibly even speaking onto comms,
if you weren't cavorting with forbidden dominus arrangement or experimenting with hive linking, then I don't think we would be having this problem.
People always find a reason or some motivation or excuse, like, call it whatever you will, to go after another group. And what you're referring to is something that happened in the past. I wasn't involved with ARC at the time, but it's one of those things that if you interact with the lore and you experiment things, and things sometimes have an unexpected result, then yeah, you'll have to accept that could be thrown in your face at a later date.
Yeah, and this is actually one of the things that bothers me about the notion that that like the lore is somehow anti-sandbox, because like really it's about building a history, right? And so the choices that we make have ramifications long after we have made them. In fact, you are suffering from the ramifications of a choice that somebody else has made for your organization. And that's reality, right? Like that's how these things work.
actions have consequences. Choices matter,
Yeah.
and like either you could try to run away for it, or you could man up and say, "Yep, that happened," and roll with the punches. And that's at least what I'm trying to do when with things I organize. And I'm also trying to, and I'm very thankful that there's a lot of people within ARC, the community and the organization itself, that have the same line of thinking in how we approach things.
I'm also slightly distracted because I was looking up. I was trying to find. There he is. So what I was referring to earlier is the fact that DutchGunner attempted to do an operation in May of 2021, in which he's asking to be able to bring people in order to just rescue people. Now this is just you. I hate to put it this way, but this is you just making it up, right? You're basically effectively bringing some transport ships and some combat ships to escort them to a planet in order to RP, more or less. Is that?
Yep. Yeah. They're like whatever I organize as an event, I organize it without expecting any support or backing from CCP. It's more like,
Right.
okay, what is happening, and if this would be like if this would be for real, how would an organization react? What would they do? And that's what I try to organize with. And when I organize these things, I always try to make sure that everybody that I could think of, whether they're in support or in opposition, that they could have something to interact with where they could have a win condition for themselves.
Yeah.
Like in this case, if we wouldn't have been opposed, we would have been there, like we would have gone in, we would have just stayed there while we would have been out, like we had our win, like, hey, we actually managed to pull it off. And then all the Triglavian supports could say, like, hey, look, like we've got this reputation of being the evil bad guys, but we're not that bad, because look, these people wanted to go, we let them go, we're not holding people against their will. Alternatively, if they would have said, like, hey, no, that's not happening, and they would attack us, they would have the win to prevent the evacuation to succeed. And from our side, we would have the win because all of a sudden there is this narrative that you could present with, hey, look, this is an unarmed evacuation transport, there's no weapons, and you're denying people to leave if they don't want to be in Pochven. So you are taking them hostage, you are holding them against their will, so you are the bad guys. But
Right.
unfortunately, it didn't turn out that way. But hey, it is what it is.
I'm not going to go with unfortunately. I actually like how it turned out, but there's an interesting question about this. Not because I think that it was good that something bad happened to you, but like I thought it was just a really great story of emerging or of how the storytelling goes. So we're going to keep going with it if that's all right with you. But first, there's a question about like how does RP turn to canon, and that's the whole point of this story, right? So this Intergalactic Summit forum is an in-game forum, and so this is actually him posting this in character, right? So all of this is happening in character. It's more or less established as canon, at least that the discussion is happening, right? Like people on the in-game forum or in-character forum could be written off as crazy if it doesn't conform to reality, but whatever. So there's this back and forth, right, between DutchGunner and some of the pro-Triglavian people as they try to make this arrange for this situation. But then in comes Seriatim Foucault, Subcommander Seriatim Foucault, which is the guy that we saw in a scope video a few months back. And this is the first time he shows up, and he says basically that there's no requirement for mass evacuations at this time. Organizations with a history of experimentation with forbidden hive linking and associations with capsuleers in favor of forbidden hive linking and dominance arrangements are not welcome in Pochven. So this is talking about the fact that like there are choices the Arataka Research Consortium has made in the past that has identified them as being this to the Triglavians. And so when DutchGunner tries to make this happen, this NPC actor steps in and says no, which causes all of the Triglavian pro-Triglavian RPers to be like, man said no. And so it doesn't go well for Dutch, right? And then finally, of course, there's this side note where there was another RPer that was role-playing a Caldari Saboteur who was there just like snuck in with his fleet and then was carrying militants. So then they were able to key in on that and be like, oh my God, he's carrying militants. And then it spins off into this whole story, right? And then, and maybe it spins off into something much bigger. Maybe it ends here. Seriatim Foucault obviously has now shown up again since then. But my point is that behind all of the player wars and everything, there has been this really interesting play and counterplay engagement between the player base and CCP as like GMs and storytellers in order to kind of build up this story over years. And DutchGunner has been, sometimes to his detriment, a key piece to this story historically several times, right?
Yeah, that particular story has so many crazy turns because that NPC message was 2 minutes before I was able to send a reply because I went on dinner because I was like, okay, you know what? I know I'm being taken for a spin.
Right.
I know in this situation my intentions are being used against me, so okay, I'll just accept. But as I was typing the message where I went, you know what? I accept the terms. 2 minutes before I was able to make that post, that NPC post went up and the door was shut. I was like, oh, damn, missed it by 2 minutes.
Because I think he probably would have stepped in either way.
If it was the other way around and I would have sent a reply where I would have said, I accept these terms, we have a deal, and then that message would have come, then all of a sudden the ball would be in the park of all the pro-Triglavians because they agreed to something and somebody else is now saying no, and what are they going to do about it?
Yeah, I would say by default, everything that happens in game is canonical. Like, unless something leads you to feel like it shouldn't be, or like it's explicitly counterdicted. But like I said, there's a lot of things that happen in universe that is like us being basically crazy, right? Like, just because somebody says that they're doing something doesn't necessarily mean they are doing it, but it does mean that they're saying that they're doing it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with that, Dutch?
Yeah, because they're like, if you organize these things, if you start to get involved with these kind of events or organizing them, like there is a certain suspension of disbelief.
All right.
If nothing would have happened, like we wouldn't have actually gotten items that would act as refugees. That's a suspension of disbelief, and there's a lot of things that you can't really simulate within the game, but things that would make sense if you approach it as a living, breathing universe, right, as long as you don't take it too far, because then people are just going to be pushing back like, no.
On the other hand, you never know, right? You could have also gone there and Delegate Zero would have spawned refugees into your cargo bay. Like, these kinds of things have happened too. So, you know, like, that's the whole thing, is that like it really is always going on. We may not necessarily always have like a storyteller's attention at any given moment, but you also never know when they do. When you do.
True.
All right. Well, so why? Okay. I am not talking to DutchGunner about how cool the RP is. I'm talking to DutchGunner about why he's running for the CSM 17 and why you should vote for him. So,
thank you for taking it back. I was about to make the suggestion.
What was this entire digression for? Well, it was to demonstrate the fact that DutchGunner has a very long and proud tradition of merging the story with the gameplay in a very real way and being that bridge for other people, right? There's all these things that we've been talking about. And just real briefly, also, he's written an entire book about how to fight the drifters, where like he explains the mechanics of how Drifter Doomsdays work, how best to dodge them, all this kind of stuff. He puts this out there publicly. He sacrifices a bunch of his own ISK and his own time and his own effort to build all this stuff and then puts it out for free. Why? Because he wants people to be engaged with this stuff. He wants people to have the tools that they need to be engaged with this stuff. So, all that said, what does CCP need to do to get people engaged with this stuff? Shut up!
You okay?
Yeah, Alexa.
Ah,
All
okay.
right. Sorry about that. Anyway, but like, what does CCP need to do?
I think CCP is on the right way. Like what they're doing is they're going with an overhaul um, of faction warfare, and at the same time, they're starting to go with a story-driven delivery of content where player actions can have an influence on the outcome. And a very beautiful example of what they've done similar is the introduction of the strategic destroyers, where player actions decided on in which order they were going to be introduced into the game.
Right. Exactly. But what about people with the problem of, like, say, the Stargates, where the right or wrong, there was a built-up expectation amongst the players that we would be able to disrupt it, or at least the event feels like we should have been able to disrupt it, and yet we can't.
Um, I think that was more of it being the first event shortly after the conclusion of Chapter 3 and the creation of Pochven, where players were under the assumption, like, hey, this is how it's going to be from now on. Like, whatever is happening, we will be able to make it happen or deny it from happening.
So as we
Um,
move forward into the Arc system and towards the next expansion, how do we capture these people's attention, and how can you help as a member of the CSM?
Right. Well, first of all, you want to raise awareness that there are options, like it's interesting. And one of the things could be with the approach that they have successfully used in a game, community goals, where it's basically what they've done when they first introduced the gecko. Like everybody could
Mm.
contribute by getting NPC kills, by mining an X amount, and that had a direct impact on the reward for everybody.
I have literally forgotten about that until you just mentioned it. So
You're welcome.
just to briefly explain it to everybody, like, if for those of you who played WoW, it was kind of like the Gates of Ahn'Qiraj, where, like, the effort that anyone did in the universe, well, I guess not like Ahn'Qiraj, but like it was a collective effort. But in this case, the the stuff that everybody did was accumulated over time, and we kind of like tried to fill up these giant buckets. And the more activity that we had, when the geckos were released, the more geckos we got. Right? Every time we hit cross the threshold, we got an extra gecko when they finally gave out the geckos. Is that right? I think that was right. That sounds
Yep,
right.
yep, yep.
Yeah. Okay. So go on.
So if you use that system and all of a sudden you start including them for multiple play styles, all of a sudden you can have something where a person could say like, hey, I don't have the time to play this game for 3 hours in a single sitting, but I do have blocks of 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, and I like exploration. Then all of a sudden their playstyle, they could still see like, hey, I'm having fun with what I enjoy in the game, and I'm seeing a direct impact of my contribution to this bigger picture. Like it's very visual with a direct feedback, and if you include it for exploration, for mining, and combat, whether it's PvE, PvP, or a mix between the two, all of a sudden everybody has a reason and an incentive to get involved and get a reward for them instead of it's just being the best rewards go for one specific group. Like everybody has something that they gain for putting in the effort, no matter if it's 6 hours, 600 hours, or 30 minutes.
Right. Yeah. Having content that can be uh, that both content that you can do for hours and content that you can do in like 10, 20 minutes is pretty important, I would say. Especially in this day and age, whatever. Um, but so people are concerned because historically events have not been able to be affected by players very much. People are concerned that CCP isn't going to come out with this. People aren't concerned, or people are concerned that this represents taking sand out of the sandbox and that this is like pre-scripting things. What do you think is the most important thing for CCP to keep in their mind as they go through this process of transitioning to this new world of trying to convince everybody the lore's cool?
To include as many people, playstyles, and interests as possible. If you only dedicate it to the hardcore lore diggers, to the PVE, to the miners or the explorers, you're cutting off a very big section of what people enjoy in the game. And each playstyle has its merits, and each playstyle should have a place in this fantastic game and universe that we call EVE Online. So as long as you're being as inclusive as possible to get things rolling, then as you learn the lessons on what you can do, where their interests lie, you can start putting more content tailored to the different interests that people have and what they want to do in the game based on where they are in the game. For
Right.
example, you could add in a possibility where NPC pirate factions start besieging Empire Lowsec, like what they did in the past with Scarcon, where the Angel Cartel, for a brief period of time, took over the system.
Yeah. Now who owns it?
Now it's part of Pochven. Ownership is contested because the Empire say it's still ours, and the Triglavian collective says no, it's ours.
Yeah.
So that
No.
depends on how you look at it.
But
That doesn't really matter.
But when you say as many playstyles as possible, do you include playstyles that reject what's going on or are even hostile to what is going on?
Oh, sure. Let's go with the clearest example that I can think of if we're including faction warfare. Let's say there's a front line and people, the call goes out like, hey, look, it's going badly, we're being pushed out, like we've now let's say the Galente lost complete control of Placid, that they have no ownership of any of the contested low-sec systems, so they need to start pushing back, and the front line lies in those first connecting low-sec systems. So what happens is you'll need materials, you need to build replacement ship, you need to start making the push. So when it comes to the pushing, you all of a sudden you could have the people in faction warfare going for the different sites. The sites could be limited by technology tier. So for example, you could have one where you could go in with Tech 1 frigates and Meta 4 modules at best.
Right.
Then you can include other ones where you could start including Tech 2 frigates and Tech 2 ships. You can increase the numbers because all of a sudden the lower skill point characters can get involved without getting ruffle stomped with a module and skill gap that they're not able to overcome at that same time, but they still have a chance to have an influence.
What do we tell the people?
Let me go take a little further.
Sure.
You could have mining sites, and those mining sites could be attacked. Like you could go for suicide gangers, or you could go with fast hit and run, where you go in, you attack the people that do it. If they're in faction warfare, if they're not, like they should also have an option because they want to support without being actually in the war. That could be there. You could have hacking sites to help push a system. So you got explorers with a cat and mouse. So there's so many things where a lot of different people could have their own hook to get involved and have an impact on how that conflict is progressing. And could possibly be that at the same time rewards are being offered. Like, hey, look, we need these materials. If we get this threshold, people that contributed by this amount will get this reward. If we need these many modules delivered, like people could buy whole, they could be killed while moving. There are so many different ways where you could have a content delivery system as faction warfare that goes beyond just the combat.
Right. And I think that the important thing there is that because I was going to ask you, like, what does this mean for the people that just don't give a crap about it? And the answer to that is all of these other people are doing these things, right? It's also just more activity. Like it's churning the waters. It's making more things happen.
It's a hook. It is something to offer where you don't necessarily have to depend on the other players to get things organized. Like if it's you by your lonesome, if it's with a small group, if you're just curious what it is about, and if you don't give a damn, don't get involved with any of that. But there are more people in space. There's people you could recruit, and all of a sudden you have more people, so you'll have more options to do other things. Or alternatively, if you prefer to prey on other people, you have more people you could go after. But most important thing is that people have different reasons to stay in the game. Like there's more direct interactable content. They can see, oh, this is happening, this is what can be done. I'd like to do this because this is what I enjoy. And it seems valid because I can see a contribution, I could see what it does. And then if that is a success and there's a lot of people doing with it, they could be inspired, like, hey, wait, what if I start doing this, or what if I start doing that to try to have an impact? And as people play longer and longer, they're more likely to stay in the game for the really long term. And that's a really important part, to make sure that people have a reason. And if they want to try something else, there is content available for that. And they don't have the feeling that they're being pushed one way or the other. Like the options are there. And if you don't want to get involved, don't get involved. Do your own thing.
Right.
Like Nullsec is really good at creating their own story. But why shouldn't it be that when people get started and they get started in HiSec, why shouldn't there be empires having interactions where they could at least start doing different things, be exposed to different playstyles, be exposed to different groups, and then have the option like, oh, wait, I could do this, or I could do that, or I could do that. And then they start progressing because they see the options and it's like, oh, this is cool. Like an example with the Triglavian invasions, we cleared major conduits and we reached out to miners like, hey, this is really good ore. Show up, we'll clear it, we'll keep you safe. And they just saw what we were doing and they were like, you know what? That seems like a lot more fun. Can I join you guys?
Yep. There's about half of scarcity.
Yeah, sure.
There's about half of scarcity that most people didn't realize. That like when everybody else was like, where's the rocks? The answer was in invasions. We were mining our heart's content, man. Oh my God, we made so much money during that time.
For example, and at the same time, while we were running the sites, one of the things that I did was I started delegating, where I went like, hey, look, I would like somebody to help tag targets in a certain order. I would like somebody to coordinate logi, and people felt emboldened because all of a sudden they had responsibilities and they got a better understanding of the game. They heard us talk about lore, like, hey, this is what we know about the Triglavian. This seems to be like it's not confirmed, but it is a general consensus. And people went, wait, there's lore? There's backstory? And it's like, yeah, sure. And now with the lore portal, it's like, yeah, here you go. Read to your heart's content, catch up, and be inspired.
Yeah.
Like it's all there, and it's beautiful to see what people could do. And with the latest event, where you could basically pick like which side do you support, what are you going to do? Like I've done an experiment where I've went like, you know what? I have a feeling that it might have an impact depending on which side you support and who you sell it to. So I put out a bounty where I offered a bigger price where people could just contract me their loot boxes. And I delivered a certain amount to a very specific NPC faction. And now we're going to see what happens down the road. Because the clue was in the description of the lockbox, where they said, it's protected with explosives, that if you try to crack it or mingle with it, it'll explode. But given enough time, the empires will likely be able to throw enough resources at it to crack it and see what the content is inside. So that's a very clear clue if you're paying attention to that.
Right. And as such, you started buying them up as to engage with the sandbox of the story, as it were.
Yeah. And people went like, wait, hang on, you're doing that. Is there something more behind it? And they start looking like, what could it be? What could it be? What could it be?
Right.
And that's how you get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
That's
What?
how you get people interested in other aspects of the game. And if they like it, they'll keep doing it. And if they don't care, no big loss. Because
Right.
those that do could have the benefits down the road.
And the biggest thing is that what I'm hearing from you is that it also is a snowball effect, right? Like it's not
Yep,
about convincing everybody right now. It's about convincing enough people to make something happen, to make it be cool, that other people will see, which will convince more people, and so on and so forth. Like people want to
exactly.
engage in an immersive universe. They just don't believe it is. But so let's just what would you recommend CCP prioritize when it comes to future events? More things to do in the event, like different activities, way to engage with the event, or more outcomes of the event, more ways that it may end up as a result, thanks to engagement.
I think the first step is to include more ways to interact with them. And that's what I really like what they've done with the Minmatar Empire celebration, Minmatar Republic celebration, where you'd had exploration, you had mining, you had combat sites. So there was a lot that to offer, where the better rewards were in low sec systems. So all of a sudden, you were also at risk for potential attacks from other people or pirates that would prey on you. And another beautiful example is the Galente Grand Prix. Like, here's a race, there is a route. Go as fast as you can and don't get caught. Like, it has. If you're interested in it, you can start working. Like, hey, how can I get the best time? Do I get my name up there as one of the fastest people? Um, I don't care about PVE, but I enjoy mining because it's relaxing and I have a stressful time, and this is how I relax. Well, there are mining sites. Do you enjoy combat and rewards? Well, here are the combat sites. Because the more you offer, the more people will start interacting with it, as long as they feel that it's worth their while. So there are still some tweaks that could be used, but offering more to get more people involved and then roll out like, hey, look, this is what's coming. So, for example, what they did with the station,
Right.
uh, one of the tribe that got the most points had ownership, and ownership of that station could be different each year.
Yeah. Right. Depending on the win. Yeah. Each year there will be a contest, and the winner will own that station,
Yeah,
or the winning tribe.
and you
But
can build upon that,
what do we
because
say
then
to
first
people
you got
that
people
like that?
involved. Okay, this is worthwhile, and then oh, it has an impact, and then you can expand it, and then will people start looking, like, oh, what's going to be next, or what could be the outcome, and what outcome would I like to see, and start reacting on that.
So the biggest complaint though that I see about sites are that they're cookie cutter. And that's in spite of the fact that each event has different requirements, has different threats, whatever, but apparently it's still cookie cutter. How do we make event sites that aren't cookie cutter, or at least that convince people they're not cookie cutter?
That's a really hard call to make, because you'll have a really big balancing act that you need to perform. Because one thing you want is that people who just started playing will be able to interact with it, and you'll also have to keep in mind that that could be people who had no experience, no guide, no mentor to guide them through those steps, and you still want to give them a challenge that is on their level, that inspires them to progress and go on for the next one. But at the same time, you're trying to find something for the long term players, people that are looking for a challenge where they could go like, oh, this is a challenge, I'll take that thing on.
What if they combine the two, the hacking and the combat sites, such that like so for example in the hunt sites, right? You have the
Mhm.
first room which is a bunch of rats that come in, and then acceleration gate opens. You go inside. There's the boss in the towers. You kill the boss, you loot it, and you leave. What if there was also four sleeper difficulty hacking cans? So rather than having the hackers be able to just scan them down like they're nothing, the hackers actually have to be able to clear the site. So it encourages people to either be able to do both, but more likely team up with somebody. There's the combat pilot that clears the site, and then there's the hacker that gets the bonus loot out of the site.
That's something you can build upon down the road. Like, first, you have to get the people used to the concept, and forcing people from the get go, like, you'll have to make this combination,
Well, you don't
is
have to. You can always just run the combat sites.
Yeah, no, but at the same time, if you don't care about the combat because you like the hacking and the exploration, why should you now have that extra barrier of entry that would mean combat?
Because they guard their sites. You could even
Yeah,
wait for somebody else to be clearing the site if there's a combat pilot just running them, and then you can like sneak in there and hack the cans if they're not going to, or
true,
steal it from them while they're trying to hack the cans, or while they're
true.
fighting the boss.
Yeah, at the same time though, there it shouldn't be a barrier of entry. It should be a barrier of progression. Like getting into it should be easy. The challenge should go up as you progress.
What is the
So if
difference
you
between
want
a
to get,
barrier to entry and a puzzle to be solved?
could you repeat that?
What is the difference between a barrier to entry and a puzzle to be solved?
A barrier of entry is something that denies you access. Like this is something you have to overcome, and if you can't overcome it, you can't interact. Like you can't proceed to the next. Like you can't really get involved with what you want to get into. It's like, in order to get in, you'll have to pick the lock of this door.
Okay.
But I don't know a lot of people that naturally have the lockpick skills. So all of a sudden, it's like, hey, look,
right,
there's really cool stuff in here. The first door is open. There are tools that you could help to get to parts of the house. But if you want to get to the really good stuff, you'll have to be able to pick a lock. Then all of a sudden, you don't have a barrier of entry because getting started is easy.
right, and that's what I was suggesting is that the
Later
combat
stage.
pilot could just go. You can run combat sites. So, but hold on, real quick. By that definition, do you agree that the difficulty of the sites are a barrier to entry to newer players? Do you agree that the race to damage in order to get the loot is a barrier to entry? Because these are both reasons why people have difficulty getting into it.
It has become that way.
Do you
Good
think they should do something about
example
it?
is no. Here, a couple of years ago, it was possible to use a strategic destroyer in the Halloween event with the Sancha,
Mm-hmm.
where because you were smaller and able to lock ships quicker, you had more time to build your damage up. So if you played it right and you utilized that, you wouldn't automatically lose because there was a battleship trying to kill the same ship that had more damage. There was a part where bigger didn't necessarily mean better, and it was just get the best ship and you're pretty much guaranteed to get the win. Where these days there's a lot of events where as soon as a marauder shows up, goes into Bastion, like the only way to beat it is to have a better marauder, and it's no longer about rock paper scissors, and there is a possible counter if you look for it.
Well, I mean, it is rock paper scissors, but when my rock is a boulder and your rock is a pebble,
Yeah, but that's a barrier of entry where all of a sudden, because people are looking for a bigger challenge, the difficulty has gone up, and people that have been playing for 2 or 3 months, like with the Diamond Rats, they could get their ass handed to them. That's not a very rewarding thing.
but they have solutions to their problem. Like that's the thing. Like it feels like it may act like a barrier to entry, but at the same time, I would look at that as a puzzle to be solved. I've gone with lower DPS ships, and you go out into like more far flung areas. I find that the people that complain about being competed against are often in more populated areas.
Yeah,
Where
like,
does it stop being a puzzle? Where does it stop being a barrier to entry and start being HTFU?
I take it you mean that's short for puzzle to solve?
Well, like, yeah, harden up, like figure it out, solve it. Like, yeah, it's
Okay,
a problem,
yeah.
but solve it. Yeah, what?
I don't have a direct answer for that because it's a balancing matter.
That's fair.
And that's a really hard thing to just say like, hey, this is going to solve it, because if there's one thing that has been proven is that EVE players are incredibly inventive,
Right.
and if they're being told like this is impossible, out of sheer spite they'll keep going just to prove that it is possible to a degree.
Absolutely. And then they won't tell anybody because now they're making a fortune because of it.
But at the same time, like, to get back to that specific part, like, if you are, and this is one of the things that I found fantastic about the Doctor Who event, regardless if you agreed with the IP mix or not, the content of that event was fantastic. If you just begun, if you were 1 day out or a week old, like, it didn't matter. You could get started right away and get your rewards. And if you're a long time player, you could go for the big difficulty and get your reward. Like, you could get started, get involved from the get-go. And if you have something like that for each event where you can interact and get your rewards, no matter how old your character is, no matter how many skill points you have, you'll be interested in those events. You'll be looking out to it. You'll start telling people, oh, this is really cool. Look at what's possible.
Yeah.
And then people start to participate more. That's a good motivation. Say, hey, look, this works. Look at the numbers. Look at the people that are working with it. And you can keep expanding on it, because then people go, ooh, a new event. Oh, this is difficult. But there should be a way. What's the way?
Yeah. I think that there's the best example, in my opinion, of like this really working was the Rogue Swarm event that was tied to players alphas getting battleships, right? And battlecruisers.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was. Maybe it was just battleships. No, it was, I don't know, whatever. Either way, the whole point was that, so there's kind of two ways to look at the event, right? There's the sites themselves and the rewards that the sites come out with. And then there's the track, which is like what you gain the points for. Now, let's be honest, the track rewards, honestly, most of the time is not the point anymore. And that is a problem that I'd like to ask you about too. But first, during this event, the boss was where the most of the loot was where all the loot was. But the track was about killing individuals. And the site itself had a big boss and a swarm of little drones around it that you didn't have to kill. So the experienced pilot, the big boy, goes in there and kills that dude. But a newer pilot that wants to finish his track and get his free battleship and free battleship book would go in there with him and kill the little things and still complete his track. Now, if there is no big dude in there, the person could still probably fight the boss too. But even if there was a big dude stomping on them, they could still complete their track. So each person walks away with what was important to them. And I think that it just sucks that CCP hasn't ever like touched that kind of concept again.
Yeah, but that's why I would say I would make a very good addition, because these are the kind of things that I would include. Like, hey, you're doing this. This is awesome. If you add this, it's going to be even better, and give a presentation and give a motivation. Like, hey, look, this is fantastic. Include this, and it's going to be so much better, because that's what's going to be really important on these stages. Because what is going to happen this year is what's going to be built upon for the next years. And if it's as inclusive as possible, where people with different goals can each get what they're after, whether it's the payday or it's the rewards from the progression, as long as everybody can get what they're looking for, everybody wins. And everybody will have a reason to keep playing and look out to future events and grow the player base.
Right. And so one of the things is that CCP has ignored PvE for the most part the entirety of EVE Online for various reasons. But I would say that this fan fest, if nothing else, signals a correction on that, right? The idea that, like, well, there is a value in having quality PvE and a universe that's interesting and living that is worth investing into, right? But the problem is that the player base lags behind. The player base does not believe, like the vast majority of players, at least vocally, do not believe that good PvE is even possible, let alone worth the time for a CCP to develop. Obviously, you know, we've been over this over and over and over again on this show, that like that good PvE is how we train good people, how we engage with them, and the absence of that has demonstrably damaged our retention and the quality of our pilots that have come through our into our game. So to that end, I think that Dutch is an incredibly important person to have on the CSM this year, simply because, I've talked about like needing to have people that are like on, not naysayers, but more importantly, Dutch having been this opportunity of engaging with the lore as deeply as humanly possible, while at the same time actively attempting to create systems to help other people engage with it as deeply as possible, means that he's the guy to sit down with and have a brainstorming session when it comes to how do we make this shit interesting. So I don't know if they can make a good PvE, but having DutchGunner on the CSM will make it far more likely. That's all I'm going to say about that.
I would say that CCP has already proven that they can create good PvE. Just look at Abyssals. It's fantastic PvE, and I love it, and I think it is a great addition to the game. They don't necessarily have to add more of it, because having Abyssal is perfect the way it is. They can iterate on it, they can tweak it, but Abyssal is fantastic because it challenges you, and I'm a fan of Abyssals the way it is right now.
Except they need to be moved out of Jita.
That's the part where we could argue about it, and this is a really important part that I really like to stress for everybody looking at either now live or on YouTube. I don't care what your playstyle is. If you have a problem, if you see an option to improve the game, reach out to me. I will listen to it. If I don't have time right away, I'll schedule a moment that we're both possible, and I will listen to you, and I'll ask questions, and I'll take notes, because there could be multiple people who have multiple suggestions, and if you combine them, you have something really amazing. And I don't care if that would mean that would impede things, that would limit what I do, as long as it's better for the game as a whole. I don't have a specific agenda where I want to say like, hey, I need to see this, or I want to push for that. I'm just looking at what can we do to make the game better. Right. And one of the arguments that you see a lot is, well, there's a limited amount of time and resources with people or money that you can spend. So we'll need to make choices where we can make the most people happy, which is a good base of reference, but that shouldn't be the standard, because then you could run the risk, like with what happened to another game, World of Warships, where you had one game mode that was really loved by the players, but if you completed it once, you got no more rewards, and they didn't put any more work on it. Like, they didn't support it anymore. People lost interest, and then at one point they went, look, there's not enough people interacting with it, so it's not worthwhile investing in. So if you just keep going for what do the most people want, you're cutting out people that are smaller in numbers but still have very valid game styles that could get a lot more people involved, like exploration or mining or PvE, especially the group PvE.
Right.
But if you're going to say they're not a big group now, so we're not going to support them, you're going to diminish them, and you'll get a vicious circle. And I'm just there to say, like, hey, well, no matter what your playstyle is, might not be my playstyle, might not be what I enjoy the most, but I will work on it if it's a good suggestion, and if you can argument it. If you come up with, hey, this sucks, I'll ask, okay, could you let me know why it sucks? And if you just tell me, like, it sucks because it does, well, I'm sorry, it's like, hey, I appreciate the feedback, but without an example of why it sucks or why there is a certain issue and why it should be looked at, I can't take that to CCP. I can't make the case to work on that. Right. And that's why it's also important to ask for additional feedback. Like, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who reached out. It's like, hey, I've seen changes you'd like to see. Do you have time? Because I've got suggestions or feedback of my own. And I started listening to it, and it's like, okay, that's a really good point. Actually, if you combine that with that, you'll open up a lot more counterplay. And that only happens if you're open to other playstyles. And if something is oppressive, like for example, the Marauders. I have a Marauder. If there's event sites where I could pretty much ruffle stomp anybody who isn't in a Marauder, I don't mind changing that. Sure, it's going to make it harder for me to clear those event sites, to clear those progress bars, because I can need to use another ship. That doesn't make it as easy, but it does help other people who put in the works. Like, I've been fighting all these itty-bitty rats for 30 minutes. I'm finally through the boss. In comes the big ship, blaps it, and I've got nothing, because I can't progress until I kill one of those ships. Yeah. And if they get stomped again and again and again on something where they say, hey, I don't have the skills, I don't have the ISK to get that specific ship, that's going to make them lose interest and not want to play anymore. And if you can change that where there is a more level playing field, I don't say everything has to be exactly the same, but if it's more level, it would be better for the game as a whole. And those are changes I will advertise and push for and advocate for.
Very well said. I was going to give you a 10-minute warning, but you've been, being able to get your points across pretty well. So, but I do have a couple of other quick questions real quick. That sounded like it might have been complaining. I've not I love the fact that you know what you have to say and whatever. I don't feel like I need to ask you if there's anything I've missed. Anywho, but on your campaign, it says reduce the cooldown for neural remaps to at least once every 2 months instead of 12. Oh, before removing them. Why not just remove them? Like, isn't that going to be like the next thing?
Well, they announced they're going to remove it, and I think it's a real shame that they're going to remove it. There's a potential risk because this was introduced from the get-go. So I'm not sure what potential coding risks are there, but one of the reasons why people don't use it is because there's this 1-year cooldown.
Right.
I would say as soon as you start reducing it, like for example, remove the cooldown. All of a sudden, if you could spec and respec, and you could say like, hey, I'd like to focus on getting my engineering skills up. Then look at what's the primary attribute, what's the secondary, min-max your attributes, and all of a sudden, if you're talking about like the small skills, it'll shave off hours. If you're talking about medium duration, it could shave off a couple of days. And if you're talking about the really long ones, like the big level 4 to level 5, it could shave off weeks.
Right.
And I don't think it's a fantastic way for people that if they're working up towards something, they have a way to catch up for people who ignore it. So instead of saying it's not being used, well, that's because there is a very punitive cooldown. Because if you remap wrong, you'll punish your skill training in other skill trees. But if you can do it right away, people will start using it more and see the benefits of it. So that's something like there's something in the game. It's an amazing tool if you open up the usage for it.
Well, I think that the problem here is not that they wanted to remove attributes. How do we do that? It's more they have an entirely new paradigm of how skill training works in which attributes no longer make any sense. Also, this doesn't deal with the fact that one of the biggest problems with attributes is the fact that they just don't make sense. Like, as old RPG stats, it isn't intuitive what things are controlled by what attributes. So I just feel like it would be wasted effort to quote unquote fix something if they're only going to replace it in a couple of months.
Yeah. Then again, we don't know when it's going to be removed. So before removing it, why not give people the option like, hey, you know what? It's going to go away, but until it's gone away, here, remap whenever you want, as many times as you like, and use it to your heart's content. And then people might say, hey, look, instead of 72 days to get carrier 4 to carrier 5, look, it takes only 40 days. Holy shit, that's 30 days because I use a neural remap? Right. That's amazing. And if people don't care about it, it's one of the cases, well, then you'll have a longer train time.
I agree that there is a loss there, and I've argued for that too. But at the same time, I think that if it's going to be fixed, if this new system is going to be within a very short period of time, they should just switch over to the new system. Either way, that's
true, but quality of life improvement.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's true. Um, last question, most important question: cat ears, yes or no?
I'm going to say no.
What?
Not primarily because I have an issue with cat ears, because there are perfect lore reasons why it should be done.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about opening the floodgates on any other bottom modifications that could now be demanded. Because if you allow cat ears, why not stop here and go for that or that and that and that? And that's something where I'm going to say, like, hey,
Well, why not?
there's other games. There's other games if you want to go down that road.
But why? Why not? I mean, if somebody wants to pay $5 for different shoulder pads, why not?
Yeah, but shoulder pads is clothing.
That's true. If I want to get little
Is
horns,
something different
why not?
instead of because that's the exact same reason. Because as soon as you open it on one, people are going to say, well, if you're okay with that, then you'll have to be okay with this as well. And
Sure.
it can go down a very different path, potential cesspool, where I'm going to say, you know what, I think it's best to just say, you know what, as cool as cat ears are, as um, much sense as it would make from a lore perspective with body modifications, like, you'll have to draw a line. And instead
Yeah.
of opening the door, let's keep the door closed.
I mean, I think that the line has already been like the line is already there. You like I can get a suit of I can replace my entire chest piece with robotic body. So body modifications are already a thing. It's now just a question of where the line gets drawn, and CCP draws the line. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm buying this slippery slope argument here. Like
No,
we
no,
can
but
have cat ears without necessarily agreeing that we should have some sort of fetish thing added or something like that. I think that CCP
yeah, but that
can
will
draw a line
come.
pretty.
That is going to happen.
Sure, people
Like,
can ask
rules
for it,
will
but
be
like
formed.
CCP isn't going to like CCP gets to decide each cosmetic that gets put into the game.
Yeah, but then again, to get back to your argument, like, cybernetics is one thing that really works within the Eve universe, because you'll have pilots that are directly linked to a ship. You'll have the dust combatants that could be not just genetically, but also have other augmentations where it's cybernetic augmentations. And that's something that really fits much better than going down the path for, say, more traditional fantasy games with different races options besides human.
Well, I will say that that is an interesting hill for you to stand on, but I respect your based opinion. All right. Well, do you have any final thoughts or anything before I wrap things up?
Just really short. Like, if you're gonna vote, I would say put the candidate you want to see on the CSM the most. Like, put that candidate on number one. I've done analysis, and I could have made it to CSM if people who like me put me on number one, and didn't vote for somebody that had a similar message but they believed was more likely to make it to the CSM. So put the one you want to see on one. For the number two spot, go for the one that you think is most likely to make it and represent you the best. And for positions 3 and 10, just do fill them all. And then put them in order of who you think would need to vote the most. Because the longer your vote stays in, the longer your vote matters. And if you are of the opinion that it doesn't matter because of there's big voting blocks, the more votes are in, the less impact those big blocks, voting blocks, have. So vote, fill the entire ballot. That way your vote is the most relevant. And if you vote for me, thank you very much. I will do my best to make sure that the game is as accessible and has as much to offer for as many different playstyles as possible to make it a thriving, fantastic third decade.
Well, excellent. Thank you for coming on and chatting. This is your third run for the CSM, and hopefully
Yep.
a third time is a charm. I think
Let's
that
find out.
each year it's kind of like you were before your time, right? Each year it's become more and more relevant for you to be on the CSM, and maybe this year, hopefully this year, is the year for you. But
If it would only happen once, I would say this is most definitely the year to make it happen.
well, so let's make it happen. All right. Well, Thank you for coming, and thank you all for watching. Before you head out, if you're on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. Make any questions in the comments, or take them over to his forum post that is linked in the doobly-doo down below. If you're watching this on the playlist, then just go ahead and sit tight, and we're going to go on to the next video. But thank you for watching these and becoming an informed electorate, because that's how we get an effective CSM, which is a powerful tool for us, but it's only as good as we make it. So thank you all for joining me on this journey. I have been Ashtarothi, and on behalf of DutchGunner and myself, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in space.
And Ash, thank you for putting all the effort and work in for interviewing all us candidates. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. 07.